Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Harambe. Tonight, our focus is on the hate movement, and in particular, a man who at one time was completely consumed by hate.
50s, 60s, 70s.
Floyd Cochran is former chief propagandist and recruiter for the Christian identity white supremacist group Aryan Nations. For years, his role was to spew and disseminate hatred for the Jew, the black, the gay, to enter hotspots of racial tension and exploit them to gain recruits. Young people, teenagers in particular, were his specialty. You know, the beauty of showcasing this very interesting and special man tonight is that we can do so without the usual sensationalism that is so characteristic of mainstream commercial television. So we will not take the usual route to this subject, which is almost assuredly replete with hateful confrontations and inflammatory rhetoric. Instead, we chose the route of trying to get inside the mind of a human being who himself became a victim of his own hatred of others.
I grew up in upstate New York. Which at the time was predominantly all white, still is predominantly all white. But in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, they ran about 98, 99% white. As far as childhood, from age of 11 until I got out of high school, I lived in foster homes here in Tompkins and Cortland County. I didn't get along with my family very well. Had a lot of problems and things. And I think as a direct result, and I don't like to spend a lot of time on trying to portray myself as a victim. You know, oh, poor unfortunate foster kid, maybe that's why I became a racist. I'm sure that contributed. But once I became an adult, I made my own choices, you know. Those choices were wrong. But yeah, I'm sure that it did contribute. Because racism, organized racism, being a Nazi, made me feel supreme. It gave me a sense of belonging, a sense of being that wasn't there as a 10-year-old kid, that wasn't there as a 14, 15-year-old kid.
At what point did you first become exposed to the white supremacist hate movement?
Well, I had read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich when I was 11 years old, and was fascinated that here was this guy that literally talked himself to power. I was fascinated with parades, that togetherness, and so forth. So I went out looking to see if there's any groups here in the United States like that, and started subscribing to Klan literature. And when you get racist literature, there's always addresses for other racist groups and things. So I started contacting them and buying books from them, buying literature from them. Where it kept progressing right up until the point where in the 80s I started becoming what I call racially active. Started talking to people about my beliefs and things. I also found that in school it was a way of getting attention. I hated sports. I wasn't in the band. It wasn't an honor roll. But the thing that got me a lot of attention was one, my knowledge of history, and the other was that I was a racist. I could stand up, say something totally outrageous, and that would get me attention, and from that attention would give me a sense of self-esteem, a sense of empowerment.
Now, you mentioned that the area you grew up in was predominantly white, and, well, then where did you first become exposed to black people then?
The media.
Television.
Media. Yeah, especially during the 60s. Because the media up here focused, we have to remember at the time in the 60s we had a lot of racial problems, and the media focused on that. The images I saw on TV, the ideas were set in my mind that people of color, black folks, were committing crimes, were on welfare. Growing up in upstate New York, politicians who wanted to get elected would often portray, we want to keep our environment up here safe from New York City, and the image that would come out from New York City would be black people on welfare, black people committing crime. And I think the person that confirmed it the most was George Bush when he used the Willie Horton ad. I mean, what could be more confirmation than the Vice President of the United States running for president to pull out this ad? I mean, that reinforced it. A black man who raped a white woman. I mean, that confirmed everything for me, that I was right. You know? And as a racist, you're always looking for that confirmation. You're always looking for that one little thing that says, hey, you're right. Everyone else is wrong.
Now, what was your role as a member of the Christian Identity Aryan Nations organization?
Yeah, I rose to be the 5th ranking member of Aryan Nations. I was their national spokesman and youth recruiter, so I traveled all over the country talking to young people about organized racism or about being a Christian identity believer, peddling the message of organized hate, making it sound palatable, which was a knack that I seemed to have, and that by making my hate sound palatable, people would respond. And in that regard, I learned that from David Duke.
Now, the Christian identity sect is supposed to be based upon the Bible. Tell us something about what they believe.
Christian identity teaches that the true sons and daughters of God, God's chosen people, are not the Jewish people, but is the white race. And that the Jewish people are the literal children of Satan. That Eve did not eat an apple, but she had sex with Satan, and as a result produced Cain, and that Cain is the father of all Jews. As a Christian identity believer, I was taught through the Bible, nonstop, that it was my duty to engage in warfare, both here on earth and in the heavens, against the Jewish people and call for their extermination. Christian identity teaches that all people of color are known as the sixth-day creation, or i.e. mud people, that they were just simply put here on earth to serve the white race. Now, there's a new shift in the racist movement, and it's purely a tactical shift of calling yourself a white separatist, not a white supremacist. One that sounds easier on your ears, conjures up a different idea of what a separatist is. But when the cameras are shut off, no one talks about separating. People talk about exterminating people of color and Jewish people. It's just a media ploy to use prettier language. And I'll point out that Christian identity believers since 1982 have killed 15 people in this country. Most of them law enforcement agents, Jewish talk show hosts, have bombed synagogues, have bombed churches, a Catholic priest who spoke out against racism, shootouts with federal marshals. So this is a religion that practices what it preaches. This is not just a group of people gathering on a hill somewhere and talking about, let's do these things. These people go out and do these things.
Share with us how the hate movement goes after impressionable young people.
Well, first and foremost, you send another young person to recruit a young person. You know, I travel all over the country with a young man, a skinhead from Canada, who can't go back to Canada because he attacked a Jewish reporter with a baseball bat and left him blind. I could send Dan, who was 18, to any high school, and he'd have much greater luck at attracting other young people than I would, because 18-year-old kids are going to listen to somebody in their age group, not a 35-year-old man. The other tactic or to approach homeless people, the other tactic was never directly say, do you want to be a white supremacist? But to say, you know, do you want to have love, family, honor, respect? Well, join with us and you will have those things. And then we ingrain the white supremacy, be it through the Bible or just blatant hatred. Young people of all races are looking for a direction, looking for some type of cohesiveness. That did not go unnoticed by organized hate groups, and they have been able to exploit it. What is sad is the anti-racist groups have failed to realize it and did not exploit it, you know, thinking that, well, no one's listening to these morons, they're idiots. I was thought of as being a moron and an idiot for many years. Who fears a moron and an idiot? That allowed me to work 7 days a week to recruit young people without being watched or observed by anybody, with a certain amount of success. You know, I was ignorant, I wasn't illiterate. But that's something that we have to break our own stereotype of racist, that there are racists who can say 3 or 4 words without referring to a dictionary, you know. The other thing, the overwhelming majority of kids that come into white supremacy groups, an authoritarian type group, much like myself, come from dysfunctional families. One of the big tactics I would use to recruit people would be the gun control issue. I would use that as an opening, you know. I wouldn't sit down and talk to people about white supremacy off the bat. I would look for something, you know, how do you feel about gun control? What do you feel about homosexuality? You know what God says about it? And then I would move from there into the more overt hatred. Or I would talk about taxes, use those as a stepping stone into my extremist views at the time, you know. And it's a whole lot easier to get people to listen to you to overtly pick on the government first, and then start picking on the people afterwards.
Well, let's talk about those people, because a lot of the video that I've seen and literature I've seen about the hate movement really zeroes in on interracial dating and race mixing, to use their term. Talk about that a little bit. Well,
first of all, it was taught that biblically it was unscriptural. The other, that it was wrong, it was degrading. Also knowing that well over 50% of Americans, or people here in the United States, have a problem with interracial couples. That's one of those hot button topics that you could push in an individual. I could say to somebody who is, well, who would tell me I'm not a racist, then how would you feel if your daughter came home with a black man? And then the equation changed. All of a sudden it got to be extreme. And even liberals, Andrew Hacker, who wrote a book not too long ago, stated that the most white liberal person You will watch him become inflamed when his daughter comes home with a black man. Because again, it violates something that has been taught to white people down through the centuries, that somehow this was wrong. So again, it was one of those social issues, those hot button social topics that you could push. The youth that are coming into the white supremacy group cut across all economic and educational classes. But the one thing they have in common is that most of them are coming from a dysfunctional family, where they are looking for an authoritarian figure in their life. And where are they going to get that? You can get that in an authoritarian group, where you have someone tell you what to do and praise you when you do good, may yell at you when you do something bad, you know, give you some responsibilities. Young people want to have responsibility. At Aryan Nations, we would give people responsibilities from coordinating activities to basic mowing the lawn. Hold them accountable for those responsibilities, praise them, give them medals, give them a uniform, give them a title, make them the center of the universe, and they're going to respond. You're going to respond.
You know, there's many of us, or many people believe that people associated with the Ku Klux Klan and other hate groups are basically uneducated folks who are functional illiterates. Is that true, or are there college-educated members as well?
In the past, that was true. The overwhelming majority of the people I worked with, though, were going to college. I worked with a young lady who was on the front cover of Village Voice not too long ago that went to Oxford University in England. When I was in Ohio, the majority of the people I worked there were going to the University of Ohio. So in the past, yes. But as a direct result of recruiting young people, or attracting young people that are coming with a higher degree of education. And then to go one step further, the women that are coming into the racist movement are bringing an even higher degree of intelligence or education than a lot of the men. Yes, there are still the ignorant, froth at the mouth, beer-drinking racists. There are always going to be. But there's a new class of racists coming along that are intelligent. The racists are using computer bulletin boards, they're using cable access TV, they are using videos to recruit people. That's all a certain sign of intelligence. They're no longer just hanging out in the cornfield. You know, they're attempting to go mainstream in their tactics. Is this going to develop into a mass movement? Probably not. But at the same time, they are developing in certain pockets. And I think something that needs to be pointed out is the ability for organized haters to tap into the mainstream. David Duke got 55% of the white vote in Louisiana. Doesn't mean that 55% of those people ran and joined the Klan, but they were sympathetic to how his racism was packaged. So people will respond. Throughout the organized racist movement, be it the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, the Christian identity believer, the euphemism for the federal government is ZOG, Zionist Occupational Government. Well, a few years ago, Pat Buchanan, in an article, publicly referred to Congress as being the Israeli-occupied Congress. So he was just saying the same thing with prettier words. He said the same thing wearing a three-piece suit, and I said the same thing wearing a uniform. The other is, point out, is that one of the first people to state that AIDS was a blessing from God was the well-known white supremacist in Georgia by the name of J.B. Stoner, who's been convicted for bombing black churches. J.B. Stoner, again, came out with the phrase, thank God for AIDS. Not too long ago, a well-known evangelist, Billy Graham, had to apologize for inferring that AIDS was God's judgment on gay and lesbian folks. So again, that ability for extremist groups to influence the mainstream is there.
Let's talk about affirmative action, which is a very controversial issue. What types of rhetoric have you heard within the hate movement about minority preferential treatment, so-called?
Well, not only have heard it in the hate movement, but I've heard it all through society, that affirmative action wasn't fair, that affirmative action was quotas, it was giving people an opportunity that they shouldn't have. And there's a certain part of that that still strikes a chord. But then I thought, and I've actually only thought about this in the past week, once affirmative action did come into play, and yes, there's some white people who didn't get a job, but this is also the first time that white people have ever had the opportunity to feel discriminated. And it's a real weird feeling. I do think that there has to be some correction for some things that have happened in the past. And I don't think it happens on the scale of white people being discriminated against that a lot of the politicians like Jesse Helms or some of the white supremacists want to believe. But again, that's one of those PR things that white supremacists use. Mm-hmm. You're going to lose your job, and then they're going to come take your women. That plays right along, you know.
Let me follow up on that, Floyd, because I want just your own personal observation. No statistics or anything like that, but if you broke down the protected class, all those that are considered a part of the protective class, Asians, blacks, what have you, women, what group of that entire universe of protective class would you say, from your own personal observation, has benefited most from affirmative action?
Probably white women. I mean, that's, you know, because that's, yeah. A lot of employers feel, you know, hiring a woman, that they've covered their butt as far as affirmative action.
Let's talk about your metamorphosis, because that's what I'm interested in.
But if I could say something along the same, with the passage of the civil rights legislation, affirmative action legislation, so forth, in the 60s and 70s, it left, I believe, among the vast majority of white people this idea we beat racism, and therefore we don't have to address it no more. We don't have to do nothing, you know. Just we defeated it. Now we're finding out that maybe we didn't. I went to last year to observe and take pictures for the Center for Democratic Renewal, the racists who come to march in Auburn, New York, 40 miles away. And the anti-racist drove the racist off the street, and he walked around the block, pounding themselves on the chest. We defeated racism. But there were no programs implemented in the school the next day. The issue of race wasn't addressed at all. But everyone walked away feeling like, boy, we beat racism. The same attitude that white people developed after the passage of civil rights legislation. Oh, we defeated racism. Black folks can vote. They can go to restaurants. They can, you know, black folks can do this, that. So we don't have nothing to worry about. You know, I'm not a bigot, so what the hell? I think we have to realize that was only part of it. You know, until we change our own personal views, our own personal ideas and feelings, then we haven't changed anything.
Let's talk about your personal metamorphosis. What caused you to make the change?
Well, being told that my son should be killed, they had no right to live. He's 6 now. At the time he was 4, but JJ was born with a cleft palate and a cleft lip. I had just returned back to the Aryan compound in Idaho from setting up an Aryan compound in Tennessee, getting ready for the Hitler Youth Festival. I got a phone call from my ex-wife telling me JJ was going to Burlington, Vermont Hospital to have his last operation for his palate. So we got done talking. I hung the phone up. As I turned and I said to Wayne Jones, the head of security, who was sitting at the desk next to me, that, hell, I wish I got this phone call last week, because it's going to be so much easier to go from Tennessee to New York than it is Idaho. And so then I told him why. And without missing a beat, he said, you know, your kid's a genetic defect, and will have to be euthanized when we come to power. Well, that instantly brought a fight between me and Wayne. I mean, we got into a fist fight. No one was going to talk about my son that way. And then a couple of days went by, and I went and talked to the head of Aryan Nations, thinking, well, is this one of Wayne's bizarre ideas, or is this the policy of Aryan Nations? I just had never seen it anywhere, never heard it. And when I asked Richard Butler, he wouldn't give me an answer. He just smiled. But it was that thing that clicked the light on. It took from when that comment was said in April to July to realize that I was making serious mistakes in my life. There was no way on one hand I could say that was wrong to advocate killing my son, who had bothered nobody as a 4-year-old. Simply was born with a cleft palate. It was no choice of his. But it was all right for me to say the same thing about people who were born different than I was. But that doesn't mean that I stopped that day. You know, like July 8th, I went to bed as a racist, and July 9th I woke up and said, geez, I'm not a racist no more. You know, I didn't become a racist in 24 hours. I still have things I have to deal with.
What are some of those things?
Well, one of the biggest challenges?
Yes.
Mentally, I had told myself, well, first of all, I was asked by the Montana Human Rights Network to come and testify in support of legislation to put sexual orientation into the malicious harassment law in the state of Montana. Sure, I'll come down, no problem. I'd been out of the racist movement at the time, 8 months maybe. Mentally, I told myself, you know, I'm all set, I'm going down the right track and everything. We had a strategy meeting the night before to figure out what order we were going to speak in, what the rules were when you're on the floor of the Senate and so forth. I went walking into that room, and 60–70% of the people in that room were gay and lesbian. Well, there's a big difference between mentally telling yourself something, that all of a sudden I'm sitting here with gay and lesbian people, my voice dropped, I went over and stood next to a woman, I got up and told people halfway, I'm not sure if I can go through with this, because internally, my stomach was in an uproar, you know. This might sound flip or whatever, but I was positive that the men were going to hit on me and the women were just going to hit me. Just all those stereotypes about gay and lesbian people.
Floyd, how can we save some of our young people from falling prey to this hate movement?
Well, education and vigilance. I mean, we have to educate ourselves about institutional racism, society's racism, educate ourselves about other cultures, educate ourselves about the fact there are hate groups operating, vigilance from a law enforcement perspective, from human rights groups and supplying solutions to communities, but vigilance over our own selves. All people have preferences and dislikes, and that's part of being a human being. But we have to ensure that they don't cross over into doctrines of hate. I mean, I don't prefer to be gay, but that does not allow me the right to advocate calling for the death of gay people, or the segregation, or taking away of any rights of gay and lesbian people.
Any people on welfare in this area here?
Oh, plenty of people on welfare in this area. Welfare is not limited to just to one race or class of people or intelligence of people. There's welfare everywhere. Something I've been telling white kids who tell me they don't want to be around black folks because they commit all crimes is that if I take you to Montana, which is 98% white, you can tell me the jail's empty? I mean, it's the same, you know, it's the same idea that welfare is only for people of color. You know, those are the images that come through the media. Those are the stereotypes, and that's what starts and fosters racism, the fear and stereotypes.
Floyd, why are you speaking out?
Because it's something I have to do. First of all, it's from a very personal level. I need to do something to correct the things I've done in the past. I can't change the things I've done in the past. But by bringing information, because I'm perceived as a novelty, people will come and listen. And if they'll come and listen to me, and will look at the symbols of hatred, and will look at me, and then examine their own hatred, and maybe put a stop or examine their own bigotry or whatever. The other is, I also want to be able to tell my son someday, you know, that yes, I was wrong, but I did something to correct that. The other is, and I want to say this for viewers, because I get asked this all the time, you must be making a fortune. I talk to high schools, churches, synagogues, law enforcement agencies for nothing. Yes, I do speak at colleges and I get paid for speaking at colleges, but I use that money to go to a high school. So I can talk to young people, or go to a church, or go to a human rights group where they just help out with gas. This leaving racism was not a career move. I'm not going to write a book or make a movie. But I think part of our problems in the country today is once you're a victim, you can go on Geraldo, write a book about it, or if you've messed up in your life, and profit off of it. That's not my motive. My motive is so young people won't make the same mistakes I did and hang out in the dark for 20 years before they realize they've made a mistake.
Are you fearful for your own personal safety?
To a certain extent, because I have pissed some people off, you know, and I haven't backed down. You know, I've been very public. But that goes both ways. Being very public has probably also helped save me. I try not to think about it. You know what I mean? If it happens, it happens. I can get run over walking across the street. I don't stop walking across the street, you know. And the other thing is, I had no fear when I insulted black people on national TV. I had no fear when I told Jewish people or black people they had no right to live. So why should I have any fear in doing what I'm doing now? I've been confronted by the racist in some public gatherings. That doesn't mean I don't get like scared when they're, you know, when I went to do a taping in the Maury Povich show, one of them pulled out a gun. You know, I spoke in Missoula, Montana. They showed up carrying signs and guns that I was a race traitor. Yeah, I was in the back of my mind. These people are going to come in and shoot me. You know, what precautions? But then at the same time, it pisses me off. And the other thing, racist, and I say this from my own experience, racist and racism, overwhelming majority of it is intimidation. And if you can intimidate people in not standing up against organized racism, that's half the battle. And by me standing up and showing that I'm not afraid, if that helps somebody else stand up so they won't be afraid, then you're going to take a lot away from the racist. We're beginning to put together a group called Education Vigilance that will monitor racist activities here in the Northeast, be able to supply speaking. I've also worked with young kids who want to leave the racist groups but don't know where to go because there is no place to go. You've cut all your ties with your family. Parents whose kids have gotten involved in hate groups. Make people aware, you know, regardless of what they may think about me as a person. You know, be skeptical, did this person change or not? What I'm saying about the racist movement is very real, and people need to listen, you know. And we'll just kind of go from there, you know. Yeah, I always sit back every now and then and think, well, last year at this time I thought this is only going to last another 6 months. Then I'll be back to milking cows again, which is what I did up until 1990. So there's that bit of a fear. But I don't see hatred going away anytime soon. So I think there will be a demand for what I'm doing for a while. Yeah.
Well, what you're doing is good.
Thank you.
I want to thank you and keep up the good work. And I have to share with you that the whole time I was interviewing this man, I was evaluating my own prejudices, my own biases. And I have a special message for our young people who are watching tonight. You know, we live in a time of ever-shrinking resources. The exploitation of American jobs, corporate downsizing, the job market is vicious, the competition is keen. The kind of climate that is ripe and perfect for scapegoating, finger-pointing, and creating a us versus them scenario. Don't allow people of any color to use you as Floyd Cochran was used, and recognize that the messengers of hate don't necessarily have to come with white sheets and robes, but can appear in business suits and in many other forms. For example, politicians and talk show hosts for that matter. Recognize that we have so much more in common as human beings than we have difference. As always, we welcome your comments and constructive criticism, and you can write to us at the address on your screen. That's all we have time for tonight. Good night, everybody.